Alright guys, when we last left off in episode 2, I had told you that I had ordered injectors, but I didn't do a very good job of explaining why I ordered those injectors. Because when I did the resistance test, all of them came back as good, and when I did the cap-off test, it was clear that the number 6 cylinder was the one that was acting up. So, it should have been running on those 5 cylinders, so those 5 injectors should have been good. Now the reason I ordered the injectors was I talked to 2 different diesel mechanics, and they told me a couple of different things, but both of them led me in the same direction. The first one told me that when you have one cylinder that's just dumping fuel, the computer will try to balance the other cylinders by restricting fuel to them, so that when you cap off that number 6, or in my case, when you cap off the one that's leaking, the other 5 don't have enough to have it run on its own until it gets running with a good healthy injector, and then they can rebalance. I'm not sure if that's true. I don't understand exactly how cylinder balancing works. Spam. Spam. All day long I get spam. It's ridiculous. Half of them are from Florida. Get it together, Florida. The other diesel mechanic told me that when you have one bad injector, it's very likely that at least 1 or 2 of the others are on their way out. And he told me that you can look at the exhaust manifold sometimes and see it'll look saturated with diesel fuel, and that's because the gasket that mates the head to the exhaust manifold, although it's not penetrable by the exhaust gases, it can get soaking diesel fuel to make its way out and then start to creep onto the exhaust manifold. When I looked at my exhaust manifold, the number 6 was completely soaked. Number 5 and number 4 were both pretty wet too. So my assumption then was that probably number 4 and 5 were on their way out, number 6 was definitely bad, and because I don't know what caused number 6 to go bad, I better just replace them all. So that's why I ended up ordering up the injectors, and that's where I left off, so let's just jump in from there. Alright, I'm installing the Marvel Mystery Oil into the last injector here. Get that carbon cleaned up. I'll let it sit for 24 hours. Alright, I forgot to film it here, but I just did a compression test on the number 6 cylinder, and I'm still getting high compression. So I put in, it ended up being about 3 ounces I put in of the Marvel Mystery Oil. I put another 3 ounces back into it, and I'm just going to let it sit for a little while, and then we'll try again. But it's a little bit surprising to me that it hasn't dropped. There's a possibility that when I cranked it over, I only spun it a couple of times, so I only got a couple little puffs out after vacuuming it. And so it's possible that this was basically like a wet compression test because I didn't get all of the oil out of it. And so next time after I let this sit for a little bit, I'll vacuum it back out. I'll crank it over more than a couple times to really see if I can push any little bits of oil out of that cylinder, and then I'll test it again. I would like to get it under 500 before I put the new injectors in, just so I don't have any issues. Alright guys, so I let the Marvel Mystery Oil sit in the cylinder overnight. I cranked it over a few revolutions to kind of push out any of the little bits of crud that I could, but sadly the compression is still high. Let me show you here. I guess it's gone down a little bit. What are we at? 500 and was that 20 or 30? 530? But still, I guess that's within 20%, but that's still a little high for my liking, so I'm gonna have to keep going. Alright, I was trying to decide what chemical I want to use next to try to get this carbon buildup cleaned up, and I decided on seafoam. I've had good luck with this stuff, but I've only used it in gasoline engines. When I was reading the back here, it says you can use 100% seafoam for diesel injector cleaning machines or when priming a diesel fuel filter. So that seems right up my alley for what I'm working on. And then as far as it says adding to crankcase oil, you can add 1 ounce for each quart of oil in the crankcase. Now I've got 15 quart capacity here, so the good news is that I can dump almost this entire bottle into that cylinder knowing that it's going to leak through and get in the crankcase, and I can still get it running without having to drain the oil beforehand. And since this vehicle isn't running and we're not exactly sure what's wrong, I don't want to have to change the oil now, and then if I'm going to have to change the oil again later, because it's $100 in parts each time I do that. So I'll soak this, and then I'll show you guys what the compression is next. So I set up a little experiment here with a couple of old pistons. I think these are out of a Ford 2.3 gas motor. I'm going to put the seafoam in this side and the Marvel Mystery Oil on this side, and I'm just going to let it sit for a while, and I'm going to see how much of this carbon it eats away. And then later on, I'll try scrubbing it down just a little bit, and I'll see which one ends up working better, just to give me a nice frame of reference on the Dodge. Guys, it's only been like 20 minutes, and there's already a pretty dramatic difference between the two. Let me get my close-up camera and show you. So this is the seafoam side, and you can see these little swirlies of oil, it's picking that up and it's moving it around. It's pretty cool. I mean, you can watch it, if you get close enough, you can watch it just slowly churning, and it's pulling the carbon from the bottom and then bringing it up to the top. This is the Marvel Mystery Oil, and I don't see any change at all. All right, guys, I've got 6 ounces of seafoam ran through that number 6 injector. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Everything's hooked up. I cranked it over. I let it kind of pop out of there a few times, and I was getting an awful lot of carbon that finally shot its way out. So let's go ahead and crank it over, and we'll see where we're at. Look at that. Is that 460? Dang. I didn't count how many. Let's see how many pumps it takes. Okay, so it does get a little bit higher. What are we at? 490, give or take, 500, call it. Good enough for me. So let's get these injectors in and get this sucker fired up. All right, guys, I'm getting ready to remove the fuel tank. It's pretty straightforward. There's 2 lines that run into the fuel pump module there. You unplug both those with a clip, and then there's a plastic clip. Let me see, I got it right here. That little red piece. That is like a retaining clip. You pull that red piece out, and then you're able to pull the clip off and then unhook the vent line and the fill line. And then there's just these 2 straps. So it should be pretty straightforward. There's about 60% of the fuel still in there, and it's a 35-gallon tank, and diesel is, I think it's around 6.6 pounds a gallon. So it's still gonna be pretty heavy. So I have my transmission jack here. I'm gonna roll that underneath it, jack it up, pull out those 2 nuts, remove those straps, and then we'll drop this tank. Well, here she is, all 35 gallons worth. This thing is huge. It's way bigger than it looked underneath there. But I got it out. So you can see the retainer's a bit rusted, so it'll be nice to wire wheel that and then repaint it. Of course, here's the fuel pump module. So now I need to figure out what's 60% of 35. So there's what, somewhere around 20 gallons in here I've got to get out. So I'll go get a transfer pump and some containers. All right, so here's the old fuel pump. You could see this is the old style that has the pressure here, and it has a pressure regulator and then a one-way valve, and this valve I'm certain is what's bad, and that's what's sending pressure up through the return. That in itself wasn't enough for me to take the tank out and replace this, but the fact that there's other issues makes me just want to replace it. Plus I wanted to take a look at the fuel. So you can see this is original. It's pretty dirty, but it hasn't been sucking up too many cruddies. Here's the new style. You can see it has its own return for the fuel pressure regulator there, and then the return line just comes straight down. So a little bit different style. I'm not sure when they updated it, but I definitely like that better. Let's take a look at what the inside of the tank looks like. It is not bad. Let me get some light on there. So there's no water in there. Little bit of sediment, normal amount for, you know, something of this age. So I'm gonna pull it all out, take a look at it again. I'll put new fuel in here when I start it up just to be sure. All right, guys, I'm getting ready to install the fuel tank. I have cut off the factory nylon line here, and I've got my tube bender. And what I've done is I've taken the factory outlet from the fuel tank, and I've bent it to move it over to the side here so that I can then install my 10 micron filter and water separator over here. So I will have the fuel go from the tank into the water separator, and then from the water separator back into the factory fuel line. To me, it just made the most sense to put the water separator here, because the 2 micron filter is going to be back up in the engine bay replacing the factory fuel filter. So I just wanted to show this to you guys before I put the fuel tank back in. All right, I've got the new lift pump installed. For this ring that was a little bit rusty, I just used the Eastwood rust encapsulator. It's a good product, so shouldn't have any more issues in the future. Now let's get ready to throw this sucker in. All right, here is the fuel filter water separator in the rear. I think it came out pretty good. All right, so the audio for this clip here was corrupted somehow, but I'm just showing off the old injectors, and then this, of course, is the new injector. Very shiny. And then the instruction manual that comes with it is actually pretty helpful. It has all the torque specs in the correct order to do everything in. And there's 2 fingers pointing at something, and the new injector tubes. So there you have it, 2 more fingers. 2 more fingers. Keep pointing at things with 2 fingers. All right, I've got all the injectors in, all the exhaust rockers in. I've now done the valve adjustment on it. A few of them were a little bit off, but no more than, I think, 0.04 of an inch across the board. They were all within spec. I dialed them in just a little bit more. I wrote down the specs that they ended up. I got it just right where I wanted it, right at 10 thousandths on the intake and 22 thousandths on the exhaust. I'll keep that record so that when I when I inspect these later, I can see if they need adjustments and then see how far they've changed from where I set them. You can see all the new lines are in here. Boy, it was a pain to make sure that I didn't get any contaminants in this line. So when I would pull off the old ones, I'd vacuum them out just a little bit to make sure no cruddies, but it's all good to go now. Valve cover is ready to go back on, and then golly, she's just about ready to start. Well, try to start. No, I'm gonna say start. She's about ready to start. She'll run this time. All right, guys, I got the aftermarket fuel filter here. It's from XDP. I like everything about this kit except for one thing. Let me get the camera set up on the tripod and I'll show you. So when I got this, the filter was already screwed onto the adapter, and when I unscrewed it, it was feeling a little bit rough, like the threads were really tight. I put this paper down to show you. It bit on these threads a little bit, and these little pieces of metal are exposed here. Look at all these little metal parts that have made it through. I am just not happy with that. So I'll get these cleaned up, get some compressed air through them, and then should be good to go. All right, there is the new XDP fuel filter. I've got it all hooked up now. The only thing that's not hooked up is the final connection right here to the CP3. I have a line running down here to a bucket, and then inside the bucket I've got a little filter. I'm going to turn it on and see how much fuel spits out, and then I have the little filter there because I really want to see if there were any little particles stuck in the system that would have caused issues. So let's do that now. All right, so I took a sample of the diesel that was in the truck, and then I went to the fuel station and got 5 gallons of fresh diesel. And I wanted to do kind of a unofficial, unscientific experiment here. I've got some Q-tips. I'm gonna just dip them in, light them on fire, and we'll see how they burn. I imagine that they're pretty close. The coloring, it's kind of hard to tell. The coloring is just a little bit off, but from what I gather, the diesel that was in there is probably fine. But I figured I might as well start it up on the new stuff just to make sure. So let me go get a lighter, and we'll see how they burn. Oh, because it's dangerous. All right, let's see how they burn.
I thought you were using that.
Boy, that looks about the same, doesn't it?
Are you recording?
I am. Do they look like they're burning the same, Ted?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Cool.
It is cool. Don't get too close.
Why? How can you get a little bit close?
Well, just because I know how to handle the fire. All right.
What happens if you throw it on the ground?
All right, well, looks like the old diesel was just fine. So let's get the fresh diesel in there and get this truck fired up. All right, I've got the fuel in there with the help of my buddy over here. And I'm gonna give the key a quick bump, and that should kick on the fuel pump for 30 seconds. And that should start the process. Let's see. Oh, there it goes. It is moving. All right. We'll do one more. We should be good to go. All right, I've got the fuel line all hooked up, and you can see there's just a couple little particles that ended up in there. Nothing too bad, but certainly things I would like to keep out of a $2,400 brand new injector setup. But like I said, it's all hooked up and ready to go. It's nighttime now. I had to put the little man to bed. So before I go ahead and try and fire this up, I'm going to sit down in the garage real quick, go over everything we've done, guys, make sure I haven't forgotten anything, and then we'll see if she fires. What's been done to this before we start to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Starting with the fuel tank, we have a new fuel pump, which then goes to a brand new 10 micron filter, which then goes to a brand new 2 micron filter. Now the fuel pump is new, and the 5 gallons of diesel that's in the bottom is also new. So new fuel, new pump, new filter, new filter. Then we tested it up to here just now. We made sure that we're getting good fuel, and then it goes to the CP3. Now the CP3 was tested good because I was able to test at the common rail through its little sensor, through the computer to the OBD2. So I was able to tell that we were getting adequate fuel pressure there. We also verified that the FCA, the fuel control actuator, was working. Now the 6 lines, those are all brand new. 6 injectors, also brand new. Now adjusting the valves. Every single one of these valves was adjusted and they are exactly within spec. Put in a new starter, of course. There's a little starter. Gosh, nothing else was really done to that, I guess. Sent in that oil sample, got that back. It was telling us that the number 6 injector had a cylinder. The cylinder was being washed by the bad injector. This is the injector spraying on there. And then we had carbon buildup at the top. Did a little seafoam treatment, got that compression down. So every single cylinder has been compression tested. Golly, we should be good to go. All right, let's go crank this sucker over. All right, guys. First things first. Ooh, P0628. And that's it. All right, let's double check that. P0628. It might be just something that was unplugged when I was doing all that work on it. Let's see. All right, the P0628, it looks like the fuel pump control circuit. So it's probably because the ignition was on while the fuel pump was removed. So I'll clear that code and then let's go. All right, I've got my little code reader hooked up. All the codes are now cleared. Let's see what she does. Good oil pressure, good idle. Golly, listen to that baby purr. Oh yeah. She puffed out a little smoky smoke. Oh golly, that's a good sound. Oh, this is exciting. Look at it. Oh, fantastic. Golly. Golly. All right. Any fuel leaks? Oh, golly, what a wonderful sound. Oh, listen to that. Oh, success. All right, what do you guys think my odds are that the transmission works? Let's see here. All right, we are at, wow, fuel rail pressure. Look at that, right at 7,000. Oh, she sounds good. Let's see if it goes into gear. Uh-oh, what was, oh, the door's ajar. Maybe it doesn't like that. All right, well, she's driving. Look at her go. Everything seems to be working. I mean, I've only driven it in the yard. But, yeah. I mean, everything's looking good. Everything. All the gauges. Everything looks fantastic. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'd like to get this thing in the shop just as soon as I can. So let me move around a few vehicles and we'll get her in there. All right, it's morning time here. I've got it in the garage. The only issue I had at all was there is a tiny little fitting on top of the new XDP fuel filter that allows you to put a pressure gauge on there, and it was leaking a little bit. But you can see it's not leaking anymore. No leaks at all. Good to go. I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with the look of the transmission fluid, but the level is good and it appears to be running fine. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a test drive, see how it works, because if there's something noticeably wrong with the transmission now, I want to know before I swap out the fluid, put good fluid in there, and then find out that it's got an issue. So we'll drive it around now. As long as everything's good, I'll pull the transmission fluid out, send a sample out to Blackstone with fresh fluid in there, and then we'll wait to make any changes until we hear back from them. So let's take this sucker on the road. here we go. So after I let it sit for a few minutes idling, it did start to smoke, a pretty decent amount of white smoke out of the tailpipe there. I've been told after you do the injectors, it can take some time for the cylinder balancing to even itself out and adjust how much fuel is actually going into the cylinders. I don't know if that's what's going on, but it's not smoking right now. Well, there it goes. Yeah, she's puffing pretty good. Smoke. She seems to be driving fine, shifting through the gears. The tires are pretty worn and they're pretty cupped, so I'm not surprised that it's a little bit of a vibration, but I don't see anything too bad there. Gauges all look good. Boy, that's a decent amount of smoke. Whoa, a coyote. I don't know if you guys can see this. There's a coyote right there. Arizona. Boy, other than the smoke, she seems fine. I gotta get a camera back there so you guys can see how much she's puffing out, but it's a lot. All right, I've got the camera set up so we can keep an eye on that smoke. Hopefully it's all burned up. I think it's just all the diesel fuel that's accumulated in the muffler and probably the exhaust manifold. With how bad that injector was, that thing probably got a lot of diesel soak. All right, here we go. That smoke is way down. I should have had that camera set up before, man. It was billowing. Wow, she drives nice. Here she is at 50. Easy peasy. We'll take her up the big hill here and we'll see if she soots up at all. She's doing good. Alright guys, that's it for episode 3. Like I said, I'm going to get the truck into the shop, drain that transmission fluid, send it out for a sample, and then kind of go underneath and make sure everything else is in good shape. I think it needs an alignment because the tires are cupping a little bit. I'm hoping that the ball joints aren't going to be an issue, but my buddy told me he races the piss out of these things, and he told me that the Carli ball joints last forever, so much so that when he's replacing his front axle, he's going to pull those ball joints off and move them to another one. So hopefully everything is going to be okay underneath, and then hopefully the sampling comes back good on the transmission and it just needs a good fluid change, and then I'll get many years of service out of it. So that'll be in episode 4 in the future. Not sure exactly when because that's not super pressing right now, but thanks for watching. I'm glad it's running. I'll catch you guys next week.